Imagine this. You wake up and something feels off. There's no external threat, no catastrophe, no screaming alarms. But inside your chest, there's a quiet dread, a heaviness you can't name, a whisper, so faint it's almost inaudible, yet relentless. You're not doing enough. You're not good enough. You're falling behind. And you rise, like you always do, into the armor of routine. You check your phone. You scroll past 1,000 lives more beautiful than yours. You put on a smile that doesn't reach your eyes. You chase the next task, the next goal, the next distraction. But underneath it all, beneath the noise and the numbness, something is breaking, and no one can see it, because the war you're fighting doesn't leave bruises. It leaves doubt. There's a war happening right now, not in the streets, not in the headlines, but in the most sacred and terrifying place of all, your mind. It is a war waged between voices, between the self you were told to be and the self you're terrified to become, between the inner critic and the faint voice of intuition, between survival patterns etched in childhood and the deep, aching hunger for freedom. And it's silent, because you've been trained not to talk about it, trained to say, I'm fine, while you're dying inside, trained to keep moving when your soul is begging for rest, trained to wear masks so long you've forgotten your own face. But what if that silence is a real weapon? What if the very structure of modern life depends on you never hearing your own thoughts clearly, on keeping you just busy enough, just distracted enough, just afraid enough to never question why you feel so empty in a world so full? Ask yourself, when was the last time you sat still long enough to hear the war inside you, to listen to the voice beneath the critic, the voice of truth, not fear? When was the last time you chose discomfort over distraction, stillness over scrolling, authenticity over performance? Because here's the truth most people never dare say out loud. Most of us are not fighting external battles. We're fighting ourselves. Every day, every hour, in 1,000 subtle ways. And the most dangerous wars are the ones we normalize. The war between who you are and who you're pretending to be. The war between your trauma responses and your deepest values. The war between your longing for meaning and your addiction to comfort. No bullets, no blood, just small betrayals, micro-abandonments, tiny surrenders. Until one day, you don't even recognize the sound of your own soul anymore. What causes this war? Why does the mind turn inward on itself like a house divided? And more importantly, who benefits from your silence? This is where we must go deeper. Because this war didn't start with you. It started long ago, with conditioning, with survival, with systems designed to keep you asleep. The question is not whether you're at war. The question is, will you keep fighting battles that were never yours? Or will you wake up and remember who you were before the war began? Next, we uncover the hidden architecture of this silent war, the psychological roots, the philosophical betrayals, the early wounds that taught you to turn against yourself. Ready to go deeper? Shall I continue to the next section? The hidden problem and its psychological/philosophical roots? At some point in your life, long before you knew the meaning of self-awareness, you were handed a script, not with words, not with rules, but with energy. Maybe it came through silence, maybe through a parent's frown, maybe through praise that only arrived when you played the right role. But the message was clear. Who you truly are is not safe. So you adapted. You became the pleaser, the achiever, the perfectionist. You learned to smile through discomfort, to stay quiet when something felt wrong, to be good instead of whole. And that's when the war began. Not a loud rebellion, not an obvious trauma, but a subtle fracture where the authentic self was pushed underground and the adapted self stepped in to survive. Carl Jung called this the formation of the persona, the mask we wear to function in society. But beneath that mask lies a shadow, all the parts of you that were exiled in exchange for acceptance. Your anger, your grief, your vulnerability, your creativity, your need. And what happens when we exile parts of ourselves? They don't disappear. They fight their way back through anxiety, through self-sabotage, through chronic guilt and unexplained numbness. That's the silent war. It's not you versus the world. It's you versus the parts of yourself you were taught to fear. Let's go deeper. Modern psychology shows us that the brain is designed not for truth, but for safety. Your nervous system doesn't ask, is this authentic? It asks, have we survived this before? So if you were raised in an environment where emotions were punished or dismissed, you learned to suppress them. If you were shamed for speaking up, you learned to stay silent. If love was conditional, you learned to perform. These patterns form early, and they harden into personality traits. But they are not you. They are strategies. Schopenhauer once said, "A man can do what he wills, but he cannot will what he wills." In other words, your choices, however conscious they seem, are often governed by unconscious programming. That's why the war feels so invisible, because it shows up as ordinary life. You overthink every decision. You fear being too much or not enough. You procrastinate on what matters most. You feel exhausted by your own mind, but you can't stop running, because stopping means facing the origin of the war. And that origin is emotional abandonment, often subtle, often unintentional, but always powerful. It's the moment the child learns, my feelings are too much. My needs are inconvenient. If I want to be loved, I must shrink. That child grows into an adult who mistrusts joy, who equates stress with purpose, who finds comfort in self-criticism because it feels more familiar than self-compassion. You see it now, don't you? This isn't about willpower. It's about wiring. But there's more. This internal war is not just personal, it's cultural. Modern society thrives on your inner division because divided people are easy to control. People at war with themselves are too distracted to challenge the system. Aldous Huxley warned of this in Brave New World. A society that doesn't need to oppress you with force, because it keeps you numb with pleasure and noise. Jean-Paul Sartre saw it too, that in our freedom we become anxious, and so we choose roles, identities, distractions, anything to avoid confronting the terror of truly choosing our lives. And Nietzsche, with his brutal clarity, said, "Man is the cruelest animal." Yes, especially when turned inward, especially when taught to police his own mind before anyone else has to. So here's the heart of the problem. You were taught to silence yourself before the world ever had to. You were trained to internalize the critic, the punisher, the shamer, until you no longer needed external oppression. Because now you do it yourself. You punish yourself for resting. You feel guilty for saying no. You chase perfection and call it discipline. You abandon yourself and call it success. But it's not success. It's a system of inner violence masked as virtue. And the longer you stay in it, the more you forget that peace is even possible. Yet beneath all this, there is something older than the war. Something untouched by programming. Something that never forgot who you were before you had to adapt. The mind may be a battlefield, but the soul is witness. Waiting, watching, remembering. And the moment you stop fighting yourself, even for one breath, that soul begins to rise. So ask yourself, who would I be if I stopped running? What would I hear if I sat in silence and listened without judgment? And what if the very war I've been trying to win was never mine to fight in the first place? Shall we continue? The next section will explore the next layer of the spiral, the unseen consequences, how this war silently shapes your emotions, decisions, relationships, and sense of reality. You think the war lives only inside you, but look closer. It's in the way you hesitate before speaking your truth, the way you apologize for having needs, the way you replay conversations at night, dissecting every word, wondering if you were too much or not enough. It's in the way you avoid mirrors, not because of what you see, but because of what you don't want to feel. And it's in the way you numb, not with extremes, not always with drugs or chaos, but with small, daily escapes, endless scrolling, perfectionist planning, overworking in the name of purpose, undersharing in the name of privacy. You tell yourself these are choices, but they're responses to a war you've normalized so deeply that peace feels unsafe. The consequences are everywhere. In your relationships, you crave intimacy, but fear being truly seen. You long for connection, yet sabotage it with silence, withdrawal, or control. You oscillate between overgiving and emotional detachment, because you've never felt fully safe to exist without performing. In your work, you chase success not as a celebration of your gifts, but as a shield against inadequacy. Even your ambition becomes corrupted, driven not by inspiration, but by a need to outrun the inner critic. You may achieve, you may impress, but when the applause fades, you're left with the same haunting question. Is this really who I am? In your sense of self, you become addicted to identity. You wear labels like armor, entrepreneur, artist, healer, intellectual, anything to distract from the terrifying truth that underneath all, you don't really know who you are. Because how could you? You've spent a lifetime becoming what others needed you to be. Let's get even more uncomfortable. The war doesn't just shape your behaviors. It shapes your perception of reality. You begin to mistrust ease. If something feels peaceful, Your body assumes it must be boring or dangerous because your nervous system is wired for chaos. So you chase stimulation. You recreate the same emotional cycles. You attract partners, careers, or crises that mirror the same unhealed patterns. And when calm finally arrives, you sabotage it. Why? Because war is familiar, and the mind finds comfort in what it knows, even when it's destroying you. Modern neuroscience backs this up. The brain's default mode network, the part responsible for your internal monologue, is most active when you're not focused on the outside world. It's the voice of self-reflection and often self-judgment. For many people, this becomes a breeding ground of inner conflict. Unless you train the mind through practices like mindfulness, reflection, or trauma healing, the default mode network doesn't bring peace. It brings rumination. And rumination, unchecked, becomes identity. You start to believe, this anxiety is who I am. This sadness is me. This pressure, this shame, this tightness in my chest is just life. But it's not life. It's war. You just forgot you were allowed to feel something else. Now, widen the lens even further. How many of our societal structures are built on people who are quietly suffering? Capitalism thrives on insecurity, convincing you that you're only as valuable as your output. Social media thrives on comparison, fueling endless inadequacy in the name of connection. Even wellness culture has been co-opted, offering self-love in the form of productivity hacks and aesthetic rituals, while bypassing the real work of integration. You are praised for being productive while burnout, for being resilient while dissociated, for being positive while emotionally repressed. You're rewarded for fighting the war silently, for smiling through the storm, for collapsing in private, as long as you keep performing in public. But what happens to society filled with people who have abandoned themselves? We build systems that reflect our inner fragmentation. We vote from fear. We parent from control. We love from obligation, not presence. And the war spreads, generation after generation, disguised as tradition, morality, discipline. The final and most insidious consequence? You begin to believe that the war is you, that the voice tearing you down is your real voice, that the exhaustion is proof you're on the right path, that the discomfort is just being an adult. But no, that's not adulthood. That's learned helplessness. That's trauma turned into a lifestyle. And until you name it, you will pass it on. Not just to your children, if you have them, but to everyone you touch, to the people you love, to the strangers you influence, to the culture you help create. Because unhealed people don't just suffer. They shape the world around their wounds. Now, here's the shift. You are not broken. You are adapted. Every pattern, every coping mechanism, every mask you wear, it was born from wisdom. Your psyche did not malfunction. It did what it had to do to survive. But survival is not the ceiling of your life. There is something beyond the war. And to find it, you must do something radical. Not add more, not fix more, but pause. Listen, unlearn. Let's go there. In the next section, we explore the rebellion, how to break free. Are you ready to walk into the silence without fear? Imagine this. You wake up one morning, and you don't immediately reach for your phone. You don't check the mirror for flaws. You don't prepare yourself for battle. You just exist. There's a strange stillness in the room, almost unfamiliar. Your thoughts don't race to optimize your day. Your chest doesn't tighten with the invisible weight of being enough. Instead, for the first time in a long time, you feel like you. This is not fantasy. This is what happens when the rebellion begins. And it starts with a single, subversive act. You stop fighting yourself. Let's be clear, rebellion doesn't mean escape. It means return. Return to presence. Return to truth. Return to the parts of yourself you exiled in the name of being loved, accepted, or successful. And that return begins with awareness. Not the kind that judges. Not the kind that strategizes. But the kind that witnesses. Try this. The next time a critical thought appears, you're falling behind. You're not good enough. You always mess things up. Instead of reacting, pause. Take a breath. Feel the space between stimulus and response. And in that space, ask, whose voice is this? Where did I first hear it? What age was I when I learned to believe this? This is inner archaeology. You're not fighting the voice. You're tracing its origin. And in doing so, you begin to loosen its grip. Because the more you name your patterns, the less they own you. Carl Jung once said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. The rebellion is a slow, sacred work of making the unconscious conscious. It's noticing when you're over-apologizing, when you're minimizing your needs, when you're people-pleasing or disappearing into distractions. It's not about shame. It's about choice. Every time you notice, you reclaim a little more power, and every time you choose differently, you interrupt the war. But awareness is just the beginning. The next phase of rebellion is radical. You befriend the enemy. What enemy? The one inside you. The critic, the addict, the anxious child, the controller, the part that sabotages every good thing that tries to enter your life. These are not villains. They are protectors. They came online when you were too young to process pain. They built walls around your heart to keep you from shattering. And yes, those walls are now prisons. But here's the paradox. You don't break the prison by attacking the guards. You break it by thanking them and inviting them to retire. You tell the perfectionist, "Thank you for keeping me safe when I was judged. I don't need you to run the show anymore." You tell the overthinker, "Thank you for analyzing every danger when I had no one else to trust. You can rest now." This is integration, not exorcism, not rejection, but reintegration of all the fragmented parts of your psyche. Still with me? Good, because now we reach the most uncomfortable part. You learn to sit in discomfort, not to suffer, but to witness. You stop fleeing from the emptiness. You stop numbing the ache. You stop trying to fill the silence with validation, stimulation, or noise. And in that silence, something miraculous happens. You realize that the thing you've been running from is just feeling. Sadness, loneliness, grief, longing. These are not enemies. They are sacred messengers. They point to your unmet needs, your buried truths, your lost dreams. And once you stop resisting them, you can learn from them. You cry, you grieve, you shake, you write, you scream into a pillow if you need to. And after the wave passes, you realize you're still here, and something in you feels lighter, because that emotion didn't come to destroy you. It came to be released. The final act of rebellion, living from authenticity. You say no when you mean no. You stop explaining your boundaries. You start creating not for approval, but for truth. You surround yourself with people who don't require you to shrink. You risk being misunderstood, because freedom is not the absence of criticism. It's the presence of self-connection. And slowly you realize the war was never your identity. It was your initiation. It broke you apart so you could meet the pieces. It tested your loyalty to yourself. And it gave you the courage to return, not as the person you were told to be, but as the person you've always been. You are no longer a soldier in your own mind. You are the witness, the healer, the sovereign one who walks through fire, not to prove your strength, but to reclaim your soul. And now, the silence inside you no longer feels dangerous. It feels holy. Shall we complete the journey? The final section awaits. The ultimate truth, the final, most powerful realization, the insight that transforms everything. Let me know when you're ready. Imagine waking up one day and realizing you were never broken. You were simply split. Split between who you truly are and who you thought you had to be. And all your pain, all your shame, confusion, self-hatred, they were never signs of weakness. They were signals from a deeper self, one that refused to die quietly in a world that told you to conform. That tension in your chest, that fatigue in your bones, that wasn't failure. It was resistance. Not resistance to life, but resistance to the lie you were living. There's a concept in depth psychology called the false self. It's the version of you that formed as a response to trauma, expectation, survival, the pleasing, the performing, the controlling, the overly strong, the overly kind, the overly rational. The false self is not evil. It was necessary. It got you through childhood, heartbreak, rejection, society. But here's the truth. The false self can succeed, but it can never feel alive, because it's not you. Not really. It's a shell, a strategy, a well-crafted ghost. And the war inside your mind? It was never just chaos. It was the sound of your true self trying to return. Now here's the paradox. The moment you stop running, stop fixing, stop trying to win the war, you realize the enemy was never real. There's nothing inside you that needs to be destroyed, only something that needs to be seen. The critic wants safety. The addict wants connection. The anxious child wants presence. Even your darkest patterns carry a sacred message. Please don't abandon me again. Let that sink in. The parts of you spent years trying to kill only ever wanted to belong, but they didn't know how to ask. So they screamed, sabotaged, shut down, acted out. And you thought, I'm broken. But no, you were fragmented. And now you're ready to come home. Here's the most powerful truth of all. You do not need to become anything. You're not a project. You are not a brand. You are not an algorithm to optimize. You are a living, breathing, feeling soul. You are allowed to be soft, to be messy, to not have the answers, to slow down, to cry in the middle of the day, to laugh without knowing why. You're allowed to take up space simply by existing. There is no medal for self-denial, no prize for perfection, no liberation in becoming everything to everyone. But there is peace in becoming real, not in a curated, aesthetic sense, but in a raw, trembling, wild way, in the way a storm is real. A newborn scream is real. A still forest at dawn is real. Your authenticity will not always be pretty, but it will be honest, and that honesty will set you free. So now the war ends not with battle cry, but with a whisper. I am allowed to be me, not because you've earned it, not because you've healed perfectly, but because you're here. And that's enough. Not the social mask, not the identity, not the survivor. You, the quiet watcher, the eternal self behind the noise, the soul beneath the scars. You are not your trauma. You are not your history. You are not your conditioning. You are what remains when all of that falls away. So now let the mask crack. Let the roles fall. Let the silence inside you become your sanctuary, not your enemy. There will still be pain. There will still be doubt. But there will also be clarity. There will be peace. There will be wholeness. And perhaps, most beautiful of all, there will be you, unfiltered, unmasked, unapologetically human, not healed, but healing, every day, every breath. And that, dear soul, is more than enough. The war is over. Welcome home.